we are coming to the end of the month of August. Our theme has been respect for other peoples and nations and gratitude. And I want to talk to you today about finding oneness in chaos and multiplicity. The appearance of chaos and multiplicity can be so overwhelming. You know, have you ever been up in the mountains and seen a snowflake? I mean, an actual snowflake, not down where it melts on the ground, not where it's falling and it's already soft, but up where it's really, really cold. Have you ever seen them? They really look like that. When I was a kid, I thought those were just, you know, make-believe. It wasn't until I was 15 and I started skiing that I realized that that's actually what snowflakes look like. I could not believe it. I sat on the chairlift watching them fall on my ski jacket. I almost forgot to get off. I was just so astounded at the complexity in these tiny, temporary little things. So when we're looking into finding order in the midst of chaos and multiplicity, sometimes the challenge is finding connection where the differences seem to be so big. And we've been talking about that some this month. Apparently, a Department of Water Resources fellow stopped at a Texas ranch to talk with the old rancher, and he said, "I need to inspect this ranch for your water allocation." And the rancher said, "Well, okay, go ahead, but don't go in that field over there." And the water representative said, "Mister, I have the authority of the federal government with me. See this card? This means I am allowed to go wherever I wish on any agricultural land, no questions asked. Have I made myself clear? Do you understand?" And the rancher nodded politely and went on with his chores. A little while later, the rancher heard a loud scream and saw the water rep running for his life with the rancher's bull closing in on him. And the rep was clearly terrified, and so the old rancher immediately threw down his tools, ran to the fence, and yelled at the top of his lungs, "Show him your card!" Sometimes we think we rule the world, and then the universe shows us that that is really not how it's working at all. Not a bit. So I would say that one of the things that is waiting for us to discover it in the midst of finding oneness in the chaos and multiplicity is that there is order in there. It's just that from the point of view that we're looking at it, from the perspective that we're able to see, we can't see it because we don't have a full enough view of what it is to get a real sense of it. And this is a chaos manifestation plotted by a computer. That's a chaotic system describing itself. This also is actually a three-dimensional image. And this is how it is described. This is the image that Margaret Wheatley has on the cover of her book, Leadership and the New Science. This is a three-winged bird, apparently. And they call it a chaotic strange attractor. This is the description. This is a self-portrait drawn by a chaotic system. The system's behavior is plotted over millions of iterations, and the system appears to be wandering chaotically, always displaying new and different behavior, but over time, a deeper order, a shape, is revealed. And this order is inherent to that chaotic system. It was always there, but not revealed until its chaotic movements were plotted in multiple dimensions over time. So if you were to see this from a particular direction, it might just look like a bunch of random dots. But if you could get the exact right angle, you'd be able to see the order that is perfectly inherent in every one of those feathers. And so the definition of a strange attractor because we see them in this kind of chaotic system, we see them in fractals. It's an equation or a fractal set that represents a complex pattern of behavior. It is a pattern. And it's in a chaotic system. So within a chaotic system, there is a natural order, if we can see it. Carl Jung said, in all chaos, there is cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. And Jose Saramago, Portuguese writer and actually a recipient of the Nobel Prize in Literature, said, chaos is merely order waiting to be deciphered. And I suspect that for everything we think is unexplainable or incurable or a mystery that can't be solved, it's merely a matter that we don't know yet. Because there's an infinite amount beyond what we know. There's such an infinite amount that we don't know. And so when we look at chaos, one of the things that is important to recognize is that there is no chaotic system that does not have some kind of internal order. Now that is a very important thing to recognize, because it means that what we see, wherever it is that we're looking at an appearance that's absolutely marvelous or absolutely terrible, is that in the chaos of that appearance, in the disordered aspects of that appearance, there is something inherently working with it perfectly, but it isn't visible. So when we look at the loss of a business, or the end of a relationship, or a serious diagnosis, or the death of a child, or a natural disaster like the fires in the Amazon that are very concerning to the planet as a whole, we're looking from a particular perspective that has us zeroed in on that issue. And the larger complexities around it, we're not clear on those because they're so complex and so varied and so enormous. So this is true in our own lives with our personal experience. It's also true for us in organizations and relationships and in countries and on the planet too. So we see that patterns, repeating patterns and chaos can show up in nature, unpredictability, the unknown. So when we look at the fiddlehead fern, what we see is that it's oddly curled into a spiral as it comes out of the ground. And as it unfurls more and more and more spirals. There's spirals within spirals within spirals. It is an extreme complexity, but one that we can see the order of. When we look at that fern, we can see it unfolding in an orderly way. It is familiar. It is nature. It is form. And so is the chaos. This is a fractal. Looks a lot like the fern. If you look from the air at a coastline, often what you'll recognize is a fractal, which means that it is repeating patterns of different sizes going down that coastline. Repeating patterns, but you can't see them when you're on the ground. When you look at a fern of this sort, and you look at the shape of the fern itself, the leaf of the fern, you can see that it's made up of many leaves that are the same shape as the fern. And if you look at each frond, each little petal within those fronds, they're shaped the same as the whole fern too. They are fractals within fractals within fractals. And I imagine that if you could look up close at one of those little tiny leaves, you would see that the veins in it resemble the same pattern. It's a pattern that is repeating. But in this case, in this particular part of nature, we can see the pattern. And so it looks like order to us because we can see it. But if you look at the root structure, that might look like chaos. Unless you could see how the roots interact with the nutrients in the soil and how the soil interacts with the water and how the water interacts with the soil. Unless we could see all those things in the system, we might not recognize the inherent order. In our own bodies, this is an image I wanted to use and then didn't put in after all, but in our own bodies, if you could see, for example, the image of intestinal nerve cells, what you would see is what looks like flowering beauty in these nerves. But when we look at them just as a nervous system in the body, it just looks like a lot of branching stuff getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The complexity of what's going on in the human body is so enormous that, you know, my ex-husband's final exam in histology, which is about tissue, his final exam was one question: describe the function of the kidney. It is so complex, it was an entire final exam all by itself, that one organ. And everything in the body is like that. It's doing stuff we don't even know it's doing, stuff we haven't even figured out yet. There are things in the body we still don't know what they were for or are for. And so here we are within these spacesuits that are exceedingly complex. And yet if we were to look at tiny little things under the microscope, they're just as complex as our whole system. And then we look at galaxies and nebulas and universes and how complex they are. And so here's the thing. When we can look at something from the right perspective, we might see the multiplicity. And when we see the multiplicity, it's hard to pick out the differences in individuals. What we see is people, right? So if we're looking from a distance and you see people, they're just a bunch of people. But when we start to look at them as individuals, then we begin to discover differences. We look at age. We look at the way culture shows up in what people wear and how their facial expression is and how they stand and what they eat and what they say. And we see those differences, and those differences seem to be the substance of complexity that is difficult to bridge. They seem to be telling us that there are such big differences between us as human beings, that those things that make us separate and unique are also obstacles to our unity, when the actual truth is that picture of multiplicity is all those, they're people. Yes, we need to honor our differences with each other. We need to respect them and try and find ways to bridge gaps there. But also it's important for us to remember we're people. We're people, and nothing on the planet is people except people. It's all other stuff, made of the same stuff. So the connections are so deep and profound. We're all made out of the same stuff. The sand, the grass, the kittens, the babies, the sky, the planets, the floor, your shoes, your eyelashes. We're all made out of the same stuff. Ernest Holmes, our founder, called it soul stuff or substance, unformed substance that was ready and willing to become whatever we put our attention on in that deeply held way. So in order for God to be completely self-expressed, and I don't know if that infinite mystery could ever be completely self-expressed because it's infinite. So that means, to me anyway, and my way of thinking, that this infinite must constantly be creating and expressing and entering into form and not form and receding from form and not form in whatever ways that it does in order to continue to express, because to just sit there just isn't possible. And so this self-expression is going on as each one of us in multiplicity, in chaos, in order, in individuality. And it is, as Ernest Holmes says, the logical and necessary outcome of the infinite self-knowingness of God. The logical and necessary outcome. Expression, creative expression, is the nature of that energy, that intelligence, that beingness. And so, chaos or complex order disguised as chaos is part of what we see and experience. Are we the same? Are we different? Is there a third alternative? What might that all be? So what I find is that order needs chaos. It actually requires chaos in order to move into the complexity that it has to move into, and also for contrast, so that the order can be appreciated where it shows up in ways that we can perceive it and experience it. And so that the chaos can be surrendered into sometimes with the recognition that something larger is happening than we have control over or can figure out. Essentially, they rest in one another. Order exists within chaos, and chaos exists within order. And together, they create the wholeness. And so within us, individually, within ourselves, within our universe, order and chaos are dancing with one another all the time. They come from the same source, and they have the same destination, and they are the same essence or the same substance. So this drop has the whole within it. It reflects the whole, even as it is only one drop, one part of that whole. David Spangler said, "We live in two worlds, order and chaos. In the world of order, we plan, reflect, and think about what to do next. In the world of chaos, things happen. We get things done, yet unpredictability persists. In one world, we like to think we're in control. In the other, we mingle together with increasing complexity, conflict, and uncertainty. And we need that. Because otherwise, there is no development to move toward. There is no growth to be experienced." Ian Stewart, who is a British mathematician and a science and science fiction writer, said, "Mathematicians are beginning to view order and chaos as two distinct manifestations of an underlying determinism. And neither state exists in isolation. The typical system can exist in a variety of states, some ordered, some chaotic. Instead of two opposed polarities, there is a continuous spectrum. As harmony and discord combine in musical beauty, so order and chaos combine in mathematical and physical beauty." That is part of the beauty of manifestation. And so when you're creating something in your life, I'm going to guess that whatever it is, the process is not orderly. We would like, even if we're artists, we would like to have a sense of what we're doing, where we're going, how it's going to be, and if it's going to be good, if it's going to be good enough, if it's going to be received well. We'd like to feel that we have control over that. But as I've said a lot of times before, that's not how stuff happens. There are cosmic rewrites. They come out of the complex chaos of all that is, right onto the page we're trying to work on, right into that project, right into that plan. And suddenly, we are in a divine left turn. That was not where we thought we were headed, except that sometimes, from the right point of view, we begin to see that that divine left turn was absolutely necessary in order to actually get where we were going, because there were other obstacles we couldn't see and didn't know of that would have blocked us and prevented us from going where we needed to go to bring forth all the fullness of the outcome we wanted to bring forth. Is this making sense, what I'm saying? Yeah? Ernest Holmes wrote, "In Practical Application of the Science of Mind, our faith is based upon the fact that the universe is a system of law and order, and that the law of mind always responds according to the nature of our thought." Now, that's the important part of that sentence. according to the nature of our thought. It always responds according to the nature of our thought. And he goes on to say, the law never reasons with us, saying, I don't think that would be a good thing for you. We have faith in the undeviating neutrality of the law. It has no preferences. It never draws back and says, that goes against the grain with me. It is absolutely neutral. If it could talk to us, it would say, you go ahead and name it. I'll make it. It does not like to make one kind of thing any more than another. It is willing to create whatever we dictate through our pattern of thought. Patterns, once again, the creation emerges from patterns. And the patterns, to some degree within us, are patterns that are up to us. They're our choices. Where do we spend our time? Where do we invest our time? Where do we spend our money? Where do we invest our money? Where do we spend or invest our energy and our attention? Because wherever we're investing or spending those are the things that the law acts on to create them in abundance for us. Gregory Bateson wrote in Mind and Nature, what pattern connects the crab and the lobster, and the orchid to the primrose, and all four of them to me, and all the six of us to the amoeba in one direction and the schizophrenic in another? What is the pattern that connects? It is this essential oneness, this substance and its intelligence that is ready, willing, and able to become in our experience, in our form, in our bodies. And I think it's important for us to remember, too, that in the use of this creative energy, this infinitely available and unlimited substance, unformed energy, unformed substance, that we're not only creating individually. So when we talk about creating our own reality, it sounds like we're all walking around in our own little universe, and nothing we do has any impact on anybody else, and nothing they do has any impact on us. Well, try telling that to one cell in your kidney. That's not how it works. We are all cells in this one, and so the choices and the attention and the investment and the spending that we do attract similar energy to us, and we attract ourselves to that similar energy. But also, the whole is doing the same thing in all of those little manifestations. And we're constantly interacting with each other. We're constantly planting stuff in each other. We're constantly receiving plantings from each other. Now, we can say no to some of those when we're conscious of that and not admit them. And we can actively welcome others. And the trick is to not be unconsciously welcoming the wrong stuff and blocking the stuff that wants to get in to bless us. I mean, it sounds like a no-brainer, but we do that, don't we? Unconsciously, we get in our own way. You know, it's like the cat. When I try to get into bed at night, the cat wants to lay on my legs. So the logical thing to do would be to go down where my legs are going to be and wait for me to get in so that he can get on my legs. But that is not what he does. He stands exactly where I need to be to get into the bed, which makes it very difficult for me to get in and for him to get where he wants to be. I can scoot him, but usually I have to actually physically move him to get him out of his own way. Now that's a great metaphor for all of us, I think. And so sometimes we recognize that order can emerge from chaos, and in the moment that we surrender into that apparent unknown, that apparent chaos, and just allow it to be, sometimes its order as a gift is revealed back to us. And I want to close with this little story, because this is about the angels that show up in our lives however we want to think of them, like all of Kathy's angels on the altar today, anchoring us in order in the midst of apparent chaos and revealing the light and the beauty to us. So here's the story. Our 14-year-old dog, Abby, died last month. The day after she passed away, my 4-year-old daughter, Meredith, was crying and talking about how much she missed Abby. She asked if we could write a letter to God so that when Abby got to heaven, God would recognize her. I told her that I thought we could do so, and so she dictated these words. Dear God, will you please take care of my dog? She died yesterday and is with you in heaven. I miss her very much. I am happy that you let me have her as my dog, even though she got sick. I hope you will play with her. She likes to swim and play with balls. I'm sending a picture of her, so when you see her, you will know that she is my dog. I really miss her. Love, Meredith. We put the letter in an envelope with a picture of Abby and Meredith and addressed it to God/heaven. We put our return address on it, and then Meredith pasted several stamps on the front of the envelope because she said it would take a lot of stamps to get the letter all the way to heaven. That afternoon, she dropped it into the letterbox at the post office. A few days later, she asked me if I thought God had gotten the letter yet, and I told her that I thought he had. Yesterday, there was a package wrapped in gold paper on our front porch, addressed to Meredith in an unfamiliar hand, and Meredith opened it. Inside was a book by Mr. Rogers called When a Pet Dies. Taped to the inside front cover was a letter we had written to God in its open envelope. On the opposite page were the picture of Abby and Meredith, and this note. Dear Meredith, Abby arrived safely in heaven. Having the picture was a big help, and I recognized her right away. Abby isn't sick anymore. Her spirit is here with me, just like it stays in your heart. Abby loved being your dog. Since we don't need our bodies in heaven, I don't have any pockets to keep your picture in. So I'm sending it back to you in this little book for you to keep and have something to remember Abby by. Thank you for the beautiful letter. And thank your mother for helping you write it and sending it to me. What a wonderful mother you have. I picked her especially for you. I send my blessings every day, and remember that I love you very much. By the way, I'm easy to find. I'm wherever there is love. Love, God. In the midst of the chaos that is the grief of losing a beloved pet, an order emerged to bless this little girl with a revelation that even in the midst of grief and chaos, there is more. And so, as we look into our world, as we look into our bodies and our lives, I want us to remember that there is more. That we can find order in the midst of chaos and multiplicity, even if we can't see it. If we remember that even a chaotic system is inherently orderly, then it allows us to let go and trust that that order is establishing itself and it will prevail. Namaste.